Good afternoon, everyone. So today what I want to do is I want to go over a quick, no-nonsense review of the iPad Pro M4 and how it specifically relates to a high-volume photographer. I initially wanted to use this thing as my main first import, but where does it fail and where is it useful? Let's take a look at that. All right, so let me preface this by saying this thing handles video and photo editing great. It's exactly what you would want it to be in a tablet. Using the pencil, it does everything you want it to do as far as handling files in a very seamless form. In other words, Lightroom works great, Photoshop works great, DaVinci Resolve works great, even Final Cut Pro works great. I'm sure the others will work great too, but those are the only ones I have any time with. So what I initially bought this for was to be my initial backup. As soon as I was done shooting a wedding or some sort of other shoot at a venue, I would hook my camera to this and I would offload to my iPad. Let me preface it by saying too, this is a 2 terabyte iPad and it does have wireless service. So my initial thoughts were that I would upload my photos to Lightroom on the iPad and then it would be backing up while I'm on my way home and then, probably be done by the time I got home. Well, the first failure. Importing to an iPad is pretty cumbersome in my opinion. In other words, when I'm shooting a wedding, I'll shoot anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 photos between 2 or 3 cameras. So what that means is by the end of the night, I am trying to upload 3 cameras to the iPad. I shoot 2 cards per camera and generally that's a backup. So in other words, it's shooting dual readouts to each card. Based on my experience, I have to take one of the cards out in order to make the camera upload to the iPad without sending duplicate photos to the iPad. So my whole workflow is based on never removing cards from the camera. That's one of the things I do not like doing. I have very large, high quality cards in my camera. So my hope is that I can plug it in, offload everything and have plenty of room to shoot several things if I need to, several weddings even if I needed to, without having to take my cards out of my camera, just because that seems to be a failure point. So I want to omit that failure point right out of the gate. So strike number 1 is importing. I have to take one card out to make it recognize the camera with one card, or else it duplicates and downloads twice as many photos as I actually took. The second thing that kind of irritates me is the fact that even though this is a 5G ultra wideband or LTE or whatever, it's my service is through Verizon, but most of them are similar as far as that goes. The upload speed is very, very slow. And it only works while the app is open. So if you have 4,000 photos that you want to upload to the cloud and back up, that's great, but that may take 3 days, depending on where your service is and how good your service is. And let's just be honest, in my experience where I'm at, LTE service is better than Wi-Fi. That's kind of a hard no for me because it takes so long. And I have to have the iPad plugged in so that Lightroom will stay open and the LCD will stay on that entire time while it's uploading. So my iPad has stayed on for 3 days while it's uploading to the cloud. Now, while that works and it has been pretty reliable, that's kind of a deal breaker for me because it takes 3 days. That's 3 days before I can really touch my photos or do anything with them. And that really doesn't work for me because I like to get to work on my clients' photos immediately. Now, editing can be kind of slow, which there is a few workarounds, which I'll get into later, but the fact that it sometimes has to download either the smart preview or the full res file, depending on how you have it set up, in order for you to do any type of edits is a little bit cumbersome, sometimes a little laggy, sometimes a little slow, just depends on how you have your iPad set up. So we'll talk about a little bit about that later, but that's another thing that kind of has me kind of irked as far as using this as a full-time editing device. So another con to this, let's say you've let your photos completely back up and everything is synced from your iPad to the cloud and then from the cloud to your desktop computer where all your hard files are kept and your main raw files are stored. Now you want to start editing. What does that mean? You can open up Lightroom on the iPad and it works great. Sometimes the edits are a little bit slow, like I said, because you have to download the file from the cloud. I've noticed a little bit either way or the other, because sometimes it works pretty quickly because I've recently used that file and apparently it stores it on here. Whereas sometimes I'll click to a photo that I haven't used and it will try to download the photo, and if I'm not in a good service area or have good Wi-Fi, that can take a few minutes to where it's able to actually edit the photo. Now, something that is super important while you're editing photos on the iPad, especially photos that are synced to the cloud, to your desktop, to other devices, is make sure before you shut down Lightroom on the iPad that you have let Lightroom completely finish syncing. Because if you shut it down and it hasn't synced, and then you go to work on your desktop, your laptop, or your iPhone, or whatever other device, those edits may not have been completely synced. Then you'll add edits there, and then you'll cause syncing issues. There'll be photos that are out of sync with each other, and for whatever reason it doesn't catch all the edits. It will mess up the whole edit to begin with, and it will make one photo or a group of photos not want to sync at all. Make sure you let whichever device you're editing on fully sync to the cloud before you close it out or before you're done, and you should be able to avoid most of those problems. So as far as workarounds goes, I offload my photos from my camera to my laptop or my desktop or my main computer where my main raw files are stored. And that is set up then to sync what I want to the cloud so that I can view what I want to edit or what I want to cull or whatever on my iPad, my iPhone, or whatever my mobile device I'm using is. Once I do that, I'm able to see on my iPad the photos that have initially been synced to my desktop, but those photos are not complete raw files. From the desktop to the mobile, it only syncs smart previews. So in other words, what I can do is I can go on my iPad or my iPhone and I can see smart previews that were synced from my computer, and I'm able to edit those, and I'm able to do it much quicker because they download much quicker than raw files from the cloud. So those raw files are no longer stored in the cloud, they're stored on the desktop, but the smart previews sync to the cloud so they can be edited on mobile. That gives you a lot more space because, let's face it, photos take up a ton of space. I bought a 2 terabyte iPad, and I've noticed that when I use the workflow going from my desktop to my mobile device, I don't hardly use any space on the cloud, and I really don't use any space on my iPad. So that was kind of a dumb move on my part because I did not need 2 terabytes. Now, when I go on a trip or I'm somewhere where I have to be very light and mobile, I will carry the iPad, and I will do it in the fashion of downloading to the iPad, or I'm sorry, importing to the iPad and then uploading to the cloud. But I only do that on special occasions, rare occasions that I might need to be traveling super light. But at the end of the day, the iPad can be used in your workflow as a very valuable tool. Now, is it a standalone wedding photographer's dream? In my opinion, it is not, because it is not to the point yet where it can be used as a standalone device. In other words, if I was able to download my photos from my Z9, my ZF, or my Z6 III directly to my iPad without having to take out one of the cards, it would be much, much more valuable to me. If I was able to get them to upload to the cloud faster, yes, it would be much, much more valuable to me. I know that's not necessarily an Apple problem or a Lightroom problem. I know that's probably a carrier problem or a Wi-Fi problem. I'm not exactly sure. I'm not completely savvy on all the tech stuff. I just know that for what I need it to do, it's not quite fast enough and it's not quite reliable enough. Does it work? Absolutely. If you are shooting 40, 100 photos a session and you want to go from your iPad to the cloud to your main computer and then edit and keep raw files on your iPad, that is probably a perfect scenario for this iPad. Now, whereas I'm shooting 4,000 to 5,000 photos a weekend on 3 cameras, and I'm uploading as I go to an iPad, it just can't handle the upload. So at the end of the day, is it worth it for a high volume photographer? I'd have to say no. I've used this thing for several months now. I've watched all the video reviews, and I think it's a great move in the right direction, but I think it's a huge waste of money for a photographer that thinks they're gonna go out and shoot tons of photos at a wedding or any other type of shoot and come home and use the iPad strictly as a backup and editing solution. I love it as far as being able to edit smart previews and being able to do that on the go, because I can get everything uploaded to my computer and then I can use the iPad on the go and, you know, edit pretty much anywhere. But I can also use my phone for that, and it's pretty reliable just as well. So at the end of the day, it's not worth it for me. I really hate it though, because I really wanted to like it and I really wanted to enjoy it. But I think you're gonna have to kind of weigh the options, see what's gonna be best for you, and just know that if you're gonna be shooting thousands of photos, it may be better to look in a different direction. Please subscribe, leave a like, leave a comment, all that good stuff, and I will see you next time.
Check, check, check it, check.